currently, Khenpo Sodargye mentioned the first International Day of Happiness. It was actually celebrated by the UN, as some of you may know, and it was inspired by a Bhutanese practice. Some of you know that they, instead of measuring their domestic GDP, thank you. They're measuring their national happiness. And this is rooted in the Mahayana tradition. So this practice of universal search for happiness that now we celebrate around the world, even if it's just one day, it's still rooted deeply in a tradition that comes straight from Tibetan Buddhism, and I think it's indeed auspicious. And I would like to use the rest of the time to open the stage for questions.
Venerable and respected Khenpo Tashidelek, I am a Tibetan currently living in Washington. I would like to ask you, Khenpo, according to our perspective of Buddhist teachings on the source of happiness, it is a sense of inner contentment and having few desires from one perspective. However, people from other cultures often interpret this mindset of contentment as an attitude of laziness and a lack of personal motivation. How do you understand this?
Within the Buddhist tradition, we often talk about finding contentment and having few desires, as well as the practice of renunciation and many other profound spiritual concepts that truly guide us. When one truly studies the Dharma, one will find that these are not about laziness, idleness, or lack of diligence. What we call contentment and having few desires can be understood as not letting one's desires become overly inflated, but there is no need to go to extremes either. It does not mean having no sense of competition in life, nor does it mean lacking a proactive attitude in daily life. In the Vinaya of Theravada Buddhism, as well as in the Abhidharmakosha, it is also mentioned that it is acceptable to receive the necessary requisites for living, but one should not accept offerings for the sake of accumulating wealth. This is made very clear in various sutras and treatises. But nowadays, young people think that Buddhism is completely disconnected and quite detached from our daily lives. For example, when it comes to us monastics in Han regions and elsewhere, some people believe that one only chooses to become a monk after experiencing major setbacks in life. Many films also portray such scenarios. But in fact, that's not the case. Buddhism itself is positive and uplifting. However, when desires become overly inflated, it can only lead to pain and deep suffering rather than happiness. This is how we should understand it.
I am a Tibetan living in Washington, D.C., the capital city of the United States. I was born and raised in Amdo Rebgong. I would like to say two things with you today. First, I would like to express my gratitude to you, Khenpo Tsultrim Lodro, as well as to the many other great Mahayana teachers, for spreading the Dharma to Han regions and various other places, bringing happiness to many people. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude for this. And then I would like to ask a question. So, Khenpo, you have just finished comparing the different philosophical perspectives of the East and the West. Although I live in the Western world, my heart is still in the Eastern lands. The reason is that I was born and raised in the highlands of Tibetan area. At that time, I felt truly happy and content deep inside. This is just as you have mentioned in your teachings, Khenpo. My current standard of living and material comforts are roughly 70 or 80% better than when I was living back in the Tibetan region. But when it comes to true spiritual happiness compared to the pursuit of temporary material things, true spiritual fulfillment is especially lacking. What is the fundamental root cause of these frequent, persistent feelings of pain and deep dissatisfaction? Could it perhaps be related to the ancient spiritual concept known as karma? First, would Khenpo explain for us the profound meaning and concept of karma? Second, in our daily lives, we often say, this child has a certain habit or tendency. How should we understand habitual tendencies? Khenpo, could you please explain this? We often say that this person is very blessed, while that person is not blessed. This kind of saying is very common and frequently heard in our everyday lives, but it is actually quite challenging to explain in a thorough or in-depth way. When we look at the details regarding these three specific terms, could Khenpo please briefly talk about them? Thank you.
Before answering your question, I would first like to say that there are many Tibetan here. It gives me a great deal of joy to communicate with you all. However, I also recognize that there are many Han Chinese people present here. The primary organizers responsible for this entire event are the dedicated teachers and students of this university. Therefore, let us first warmly invite both the faculty members and the student body from the prestigious University of Washington to begin by actively asking their own most specific questions first. If anyone else has any further questions, we can certainly continue to discuss all of them a bit later. If the teachers and students have any specific questions or concerns, please feel free to raise them before we continue. The question he has brought forward today is regarding the deep-seated habitual tendencies and patterns discussed in Buddhism. Some people like to do good deeds early on, while others are inclined to commit bad deeds. This kind of innate preference is called habitual tendency. Many scholars are researching this area. If we have studied the treatises of Yogacara, the consciousness-only school, we will have a clear understanding of habitual tendencies. Currently, science cannot explain this. But it is explained very clearly in Buddhism. As for what you just mentioned about lacking merit, that is actually just a very common and traditional saying frequently heard throughout Tibetan regions. It does not mean that all of one's merit has been completely exhausted, or that there is no merit left at all. It is simply that merit which is shallow is described as having none. In this context, the fundamental concept of so-called karma is extremely important, because nowadays many individuals, no matter how hard they try, find that their finances and physical health are still not quite where they want them to be, while others don't seem to have to work very hard at all, yet they can still enjoy health and happiness. This is related to karma. This is not merely a common saying in Tibetan regions. If you want to understand the intricate concept of karma in greater detail, it is best to study the Abhidharma Kosha. You can specifically refer to the explanations provided in chapters 3 and 4. Karma is diverse and varied. There is white karma, black karma, mixed karma, and so on. By diligently studying these teachings, you will surely develop a more firm and clear understanding of this. If you do not sincerely study the sacred Buddha Dharma very well, even if you are Tibetan, you will still have many habitual tendencies. If you have not studied the Dharma, then young people today will not understand these terms and cannot grasp them properly. As a result, many different interpretations have emerged.
Thanks for your speaking. I was a student in GW, and I used to be in a Viv's Buddhist class. I really like it. So my question comes from my own experience. I sometimes suffer from knowing more. I mean, when I explore something and I find it is not as good as I expected. So at that time, I really unhappy. So my question is, isn't being intelligent and aware of more things also important? So what do you do when you face this kind of situation? Like, do you just give up exploring things? Thank you.
As for the answer to the question she asked, when you are learning any kind of new knowledge, it is quite common that you might experience some levels of mental pain and discomfort. But if it is truly valuable knowledge, then the more deeply you immerse yourself in learning, the more effectively you can ease your own suffering and emotional pain while calming your worries and finding peace. For example, if you don't actively study the various essential skills and the deep specialized knowledge you must learn while right now at school, then you'll easily become a person without proper education or knowledge, all the way from middle school to university and continuing all the way through to a doctorate. Your knowledge expands. As you learn, of course there will be hardship and difficulty, but it also brings meaningful benefits to your personal growth and steadily increases your inner wisdom. Of course, it is certainly not okay to completely lack a solid foundation for your life either. Laying a solid foundation is extremely important. Whether it is the profound teachings of the Buddha or the vast array of worldly knowledge, we should always follow what is said in Buddhism. Even if you were to pass away by tomorrow morning, you should still study all kinds of knowledge. We should have this kind of strong determination. Why is that? Because such valuable knowledge cannot be fully learned in a single short lifetime. I believe that continuously learning throughout one's life is what truly gives life value. This is also my wish. Of course, there are different understandings of this. In fact, the process of acquiring truly valuable knowledge does not lead to suffering. It only brings immense benefit and happiness.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Monica, and I'm a student at the George Washington University. And my question is more of a personal one, and it is, when you experience suffering, how do you detach yourself from that suffering? And even if you have advice for someone who is Western and would like to find happiness and contentment. So, thank you.
We Tibetans have an old proverb. A spiritual practitioner who regularly lives in constant comfort and material abundance often becomes even more ordinary when a sudden unfortunate disaster strikes. This means that when life is already very comfortable and one always has much more than enough to eat and drink, a person might proclaim themselves to be a practitioner who can truly endure suffering. But when real suffering arrives, because the Dharma has not been integrated into one's mind stream, sometimes one is even less resilient than ordinary people. Tibetans receive education about death from a young age. However, many people in the West and in Han regions are often deeply uncomfortable with the undeniable reality of death. They usually don't even dare to mention it, let alone truly accept it. In the tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, it is explained with great clarity how one should face death when it arrives, what the suffering of death is like, and the methods to overcome that suffering. From the perspective of actual practice, Mahayana Buddhism teaches us to accept suffering, for example, to take on the suffering of others and to give one's own happiness to others. Here's a practice to handle suffering. You can also, when exhaling, imagine giving happiness to others, and while inhaling, imagine taking in the suffering of other sentient beings and allowing your own body and mind to remain in a state of happiness. Just as the teachings of Buddhism describe to us, to fully understand that all things are of the nature of suffering. Furthermore, there are also techniques to eliminate suffering. Samsara is inherently and full of suffering. The Buddha also spoke of this. At the very moment human beings are first born into this world, it is precisely because of suffering that babies enter this world crying. Not one single infant is ever born from the womb with a joyful smile on their face. This is an expression of suffering. When a person is dying, contemporary researchers have also uncovered that there are 3 stages of shedding tears. So many individuals also pass away silently in tears. We also encounter a great deal of pain and suffering throughout the course of our ordinary daily lives. What we usually call happiness is in reality simply a form of suffering. After learning these things, we must put them into practice. If we only understand them theoretically but do not actually practice, then when suffering comes, we will not be able to bear it. As I often say when driving a car, if the road conditions are good, anyone can drive. But when you reach a dangerous section of the road, if your driving skills aren't good, you'll run into trouble. In the same way, if a practitioner practices diligently in daily life, when suffering arises, they can use various different methods to confront and manage the pain. But if you haven't practiced these methods well enough, when suffering appears, you can only be swept along by it and will be unable to overcome it.
Just before we continue, unfortunately, we have time for one more question.
Well, thank you so much for very enlightening teaching. My name is Helen. I live and work in the DC area, and I was born and raised in Beijing. And I have a very quick question. As a human being, we make mistakes. We do things wrong. And many times, these mistakes and these wrong things have negative impact on other people. Therefore, we feel very sad. We feel guilty. And this is especially true for people who have a kind heart, who have conscientious. So my question is, what do you do when you are so overwhelmed by this sense of guilt?
Ordinary individuals in our society can be classified and categorized in a wide variety of different ways. For example, in our daily lives, some people truly like to practice selfless and virtuous deeds for the benefit of others. This is a fundamental concept that is very deeply and consistently emphasized in Buddhism. There are a vast and diverse variety of individuals in this world. Every single individual carries their own unique set of values and guiding principles. In the ancient and sacred Buddhist scriptures, there is a story about a woman who sold rotten fish and meat. She slowly walked toward the scenic area located right near the banks of the Ganges River. Because the sun was setting and it was getting quite late in the evening, she decided to stay overnight inside a small, fragrant flower shop nearby. The strong fragrance of the flowers kept her wide awake all through the night. Later, she decided to put the pungent rotten fish right near her nose. Smelling the peculiar stench of the fish, she was finally able to fall fast asleep. We humans are truly all different kinds of people. There are some people in this world who are constantly blaming themselves for every little mistake, while on the other hand, there are some people who never seem to feel any sense of regret at all for their actions. I'm certainly not going to mention any specific names here today. However, if you look into the detailed biography of a very famous and influential person in Han region, it is explicitly said that not even for a single fleeting moment of regret ever surfaced within his conscious mind. As a matter of fact, in Buddhism, it is generally considered to be essential to cultivate a deep sense of regret. And it is also very necessary to confess and repent by reciting the Vajrasattva mantra. After repenting, one should vow never to do it again in the future. One should apply the 4 opponent powers to counteract negative actions. In this way, negative karma will gradually be purified. Even if this negative karma is purified, even now our unsettled and discursive thoughts are still incredibly numerous. In our busy and complicated daily lives, it remains very easy to unintentionally accumulate harmful and negative karma. So, no matter what happens, as a human being living in this world today, it is practically impossible to avoid making any mistakes at all. It is an extremely difficult and complex task to ensure that everything you do is done with absolute perfection in every single detail. In Buddhism, it is said that negative actions have no merit. But the extraordinary quality of negative actions is found in the profound truth that they can be purified through sincere confession and repentance. Absolutely any form of negative karma can be purified. In major cities across both the East and the West, there are many people who are deeply entangled in the cycles of suffering. They often struggle to face their daily lives with a positive outlook. The main issue is their internal mindset and overall perspective. It is not simply suffering that merely arises from the heavy feeling of regret itself. Therefore, it is essential to first gather your courage within and use a sense of regret to confess and repent. This enables one to face the future with a more positive outlook. This is an extremely important and beneficial quality for everyone to possess. Therefore, whether one is a Buddhist or not nowadays, if they can learn and understand the core principles of Buddhist thought, it can provide them with valuable guidance. They will engage in altruistic actions. As I've just mentioned to you, the act of simply blaming oneself and constantly feeling guilty for everything that happens is what we call a pessimistic mindset, and it truly provides no practical help or benefit to your situation. In today's world, people living in big cities often find themselves developing various psychological illnesses and mental health issues, but these conditions are very difficult to cure effectively using only standard medication. The 84,000 teachings expounded by the Buddha are different manifestations of wisdom. If everyone in this world sincerely and actively repents for all of their past misdeeds, their minds can gradually become more tranquil, calm, and peaceful. In this way, whatever actions they choose to take will go smoothly and be accomplished with great success.
So I would like to thank Khenpo for very enlightening perspectives, a code not just to happiness, but also to some very important tool to deal with suffering that we experience in life. I'd like to thank you for coming and for everybody who worked very hard to bring Khenpo. And I just wanted to indicate how impressed I am with the fact that some of you may know Khenpo is actually 12 hours behind his regular Beijing time. So to be able to give such a lucid presentation with such a lucid and coherent answers to questions just show to me that those tools that he mentioned do work for him, and hopefully we got some of it tonight. Thank you so much.